Hi, this is Sergeant Beast Larson. I want to tell you about a bank robbery, shootout, attempted murder of a police officer incident that really impacted the beginning of my career as a police officer, leading me to get into training, to become an instructor, many instructor schools, including some from the FBI, and use of force expert. Now, this incident happened, I started police in 1992. This incident happened in Florence, Kentucky, 3 p.m. on June 23rd, 1989. Two suspects, masked, armed suspects, semi-automatic handguns, entered the bank, Florence, Kentucky, 3 p.m. One of the suspects told the bank manager, go to the vault, open the vault, or he would kill him and take hostages. The bank manager went to the vault, opened the vault, got him the money. Somebody in the bank managed to trip the alarm safely. Nobody in the bank was hurt. The big story happened when they got outside the door. The importance of this, there's 3 officers involved and 3 suspects involved. I became very close to 2 police officers involved in this when I got hired in 1992 that survived this incident. 34 years later, I became involved through an employment opportunity outside law enforcement with one of the 2 bank robbers. Now, this is what happened. 2 suspects get the money, $227,582, $227,582.02 is what they got from the bank, from the drawers and from the vault. They exit the door, get out to their stolen van. There's a third person, a driver, in the van. They start to flee. Remember, I told you one of the bank employees hit the alarm button. Police responded. 2 uniformed police and a detective in a shirt and tie, just like this. They get into a shootout really quick. Suspects start shooting at the police. Police return fire. The detective who I got to know when he retired from the city police came over to the sheriff's department, which I was on. And so I got to hear his side of the detailed story and another officer's story, the one that the attempted murder charge was against, and then a suspect 34 years later. So I got 3 story perspectives. So the shootout begins. I'll start with the police detective. He fired 6 rounds from his Smith & Wesson .38 revolver while he at one suspect. The other 2 officers were firing at the other suspects. Remember, there's 3. So the detective is shooting at Stacy, the bad guy. He's the guy I met later in life. Out of those 6 rounds, 5 of those 38 rounds hit Stacy. Stacy becomes very injured, stops firing, and surrenders. So the detective and one suspect over here. The other 2 suspects, one flees, the other one's still in the gunfire with the 2 uniformed officers. Uniformed officer gets that suspect at gunpoint, gets him on the ground, hold him at gunpoint for backup to come. The third suspect that fled and disappeared had actually circled around. So you got one suspect shot 5 times, he gave up. The other suspect's on the ground, at gunpoint, he gives up. Now, this officer who became my friend, he was a sergeant and lieutenant ultimately, Florence Police. Suspect comes up behind him while he's holding the officer at gunpoint. Suspect pulls the trigger of his semi-automatic handgun. It clicked, it misfired. Officer turned, grabbed, a struggle ensued. It was a bad fight. There was a lot of kicking to the officer's head and body. He was sore for several weeks. Very physical fight. 2 gunshots went off during that physical fight over the suspect's gun. Meaning, misfire, the next 2 rounds did go off. That misfire, that was God protecting Damien's life. The officer holding the second suspect at gunpoint on the ground. So Damien is the attempted murder charge. The misfire, the 2 gunshots go on the ground while they're fighting, Damien told me, he said, I'll never forget the barrel on the back of his head and hearing that click. He had been a police officer enough years to know the sound of gunfire and clicking an empty gun. And he heard that click and it just instinct turn and fight. Damien went on to take self-defense. One of the other officers was very skilled at a martial arts place and taught several officers hand-to-hand fighting, different techniques. Damien also became a marathon runner, but he committed his life to training. The detective, in firing those 5 shots, hitting 5 out of 6 shots, and then they were in the body, he told me that he had been on the department over 15 years. I don't know exactly, but I know it was well over 15. So he had went through some stress fire, some various types of firearms training. And I'm telling you guys all this story because training is critical. Train, muscle memory, by repetition. This detective, Chester, when he was firing, he was focused on the front sight. He was focused on his target. He knew what had to be done, and he was engaging and pulling the trigger. Active gunfight after a bank robbery. So there's a lot of chaos going on, definitely. And when you hit your suspect 5 out of 6 times, that's successful. Remember these old revolvers. I'm old enough to have qualified on them in the military and as well as police. He was reloading. Stacy, the suspect, gave up because he was shot up. He told me that he had always taken firearms seriously, and his instructors, firearms instructors on the Florence Police Department, took it seriously. That's a key right there. So thank you to those instructors, and thank you, Chester, for being serious. Thank you, Damien, for being serious about your training and your commitment in law enforcement to survive after having that click and misfire by your head, knowing you've got family and kids at home. That kicked in. That fight or flight kicked in, and you didn't freeze. You went to it. Good training officers, good preparation by the Florence Police Department back in the 1980s. Still is. The police chief that's retiring right now is a good friend of mine. The one that was just announced, police chief, is a good friend of mine. Just announced to be the new police chief effective May 1st in 2 weeks. Jeff Mallory, congratulations formally. Training, mental preparedness. You got to have good sleep when you go to work, just to remind you. You have to have a good diet and exercise program to handle the stress. These guys did. So I explained the story briefly from the 2 officers. 34 years later, during COVID, craziest thing in the world. I was working at the airport, got laid off, a bunch of us. Got a job selling cars, just trying to make money, pay bills. Go and get a job, sit there, and a couple weeks later come to find out from another car salesman, hey, the guy sits right behind you. His name is Stacy. I won't say his last name. He was involved in that bank robbery in Florence where he got all shot up. I was like, what? Really? So they whip out the cell phone, get there on Google and pull it up and look at everything. And I was like, okay, that makes sense. Because I had the privilege of talking to the officers involved, 2 to 3 officers. And I had heard their side of the story individually, and separately, not in the same room at the same time. And so he had already found out in that short period of time of me being at the car dealer that I was retired police and that I also had worked at a prison. So he kind of nonchalant come over to me and he said, oh, I heard that you were such and such. And I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'm Stacy, told me his name. He said, your buddy shot me up in 1989. I was like, my buddy did what? I knew, but I was just playing. So I got to hear his side of the story. And he told me how they went in. And this was the 29th bank they had robbed together, that crew. 29 banks. If it wasn't for that alarm, they'd have got away and kept doing it. And he said he had a bad feeling. That time he had a bad feeling when they came out of the bank, and all of a sudden here comes the police coming up, and the shootout starts, and he said he was scared to death because all the other ones that got away, got free. So he comes out of the bank, they try to get in the van, take away. Shootout starts. He starts getting shot, and he realizes, he's like, man, I'm really shot. I need to give up. I don't want to die. He didn't want to die. I said, what did you do with that money, all those banks? And he said, I had family. I helped pay for family for everything that they needed. I won't go into all the details. It's personal. But there was a need to have income in his family. More than just a job. I'll leave it at that. But he chose that path to provide. And he said, he was like, I'd rather get caught, do a little bit of time and get back out and still have my family than be dead. So he gave up. He said, I didn't have anything to do with that other thing happened with the other officer. He said, I laid on the ground and I give up. I said, I know. I know the attorneys that represented them, that took the brief, went, fought in court in the motions, the several motions that went through the trial. I know the attorneys that did that. I'm involved actually as a consultant with the attorney that represented him on a correction case and explaining some things about how the correction process goes. Same attorney from 1989 that represented him. I just haven't told her yet. We had meetings about the matter I'm consulting about. Next meeting, I'll say, you remember that case? I know these guys and that guy, and I know all this and put all this together. I'll explain that later to the attorney. But I tell you all this is training. I talk about training all the time. Training molded my career. What I learned from the detective who had fired and hit 5 out of 6 times and how he was successful. And I mean that in a positive way. If you have to shoot at somebody shooting at you, you don't want to miss. That's the point of this. And it's because of his skill and his repetition and his training and his conditioning and his mind and body preparedness for this got him through this. The same is for Damien, to be in this life-threatening fight where, how many of you have been in a physical fight where a gun goes off twice after it misfires at the back of your head? I don't have but one friend that's been through that exact story. Training, be ready. Now I want to say thank you to everybody in uniform in the law enforcement, the police, the corrections, the bail bondsmen that are chasing these people down, that are skip tracers, everything you want to be called. You're risking your life. Anybody risking their life, the first responders, the EMS, the fire. We love watching Chicago PD, Chicago Fire, EMS, Chicago Med, all those in that first responder field. And security personnel. A lot of security are armed, a lot are unarmed. Both that put this uniform on. Put a uniform on. Put a badge on to go and watch and observe and report. The simplest job of observe and report can be the most critical, life-saving. You don't have to pull a gun and act, but you call 911 and you get stuff going the right way at the right time, you'll save lives. You have saved lives. So thank you to everybody in security, to the EP, executive protection, to the bodyguards, to those that are protecting others. It's a long list. I apologize if I miss anybody. Thank you all. Thank you to the dispatchers that stare at a wall in a cubicle and look at the wall and look at the ceiling and close your eyes while you hear somebody breaking into a house. And you hear that. I've been in dispatch and done that, and I've been the officer responding both. Thank you for listening and being calm and working with the officers to get them in to save people's lives inside that house. Thank you all. Hope you enjoyed this. Hit the like and the share button. Don't forget to subscribe. Got a lot of new things coming. I actually just left a funeral. 89-year-old Korean veteran who is my wife's brother-in-law's father. Passed away. Decorated veteran. Thank you to the vets. Thank you for your sacrifice. I'm an Air Force vet. All gave some gave all. See you soon.